Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to The Explainer, where we're embarking on a pretty fascinating macro-historical journey today. We are going to trace the exact legal steps, the precise historical scaffolding that shaped the modern Indian Constitution. It's an incredible story, honestly, of how the legal framework for the organization and administration in India was built over centuries of British presence, ultimately laying the absolute bedrock for the world's largest democracy.
So, here's our agenda. We have 4 distinct eras to cover. 1. The company rule. 2. The crown assumes control. 3. Towards responsible government. And 4. The first cabinets. Let's get started. Section 1. The company rule, spanning from 1773 to 1858. To really set the stage here, we need to go back to 1608. That's when the British first arrived in India as traders through the East India Company, holding an exclusive trading charter. But the massive pivotal shift happens a bit later, in 1765. That's when the company obtained the Diwani, which basically means the rights over revenue and civil justice for Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. And this is a really crucial detail. These Diwani rights were granted by the Mughal Emperor Shah Alam, right after the company won the Battle of Buxar in 1764. This officially kicked off the company's career as a territorial power, a rule that would last until the Crown took over in 1858, paving that long road to independence in 1947. Think of the Regulating Act of 1773 as the very first step the British government took to rein in and control the company's affairs. First, it designated the Governor of Bengal as the Governor-General of Bengal, and it created a 4-member executive council to assist him. Lord Warren Hastings was the very first person to hold this title. Second, it subordinated the previously independent governors of Bombay and Madras to him. Third, and this is big, it established a Supreme Court at Calcutta in 1774, which consisted of 1 Chief Justice and 3 other judges. Fourth, it strictly prohibited any company servants from engaging in private trade or taking bribes from the locals. And fifth, it actually mandated the Court of Directors, which was the company's governing body, to report on its revenue, civil, and military affairs directly to the British government. Well, they had to fix a few defects in that 1773 Act, so Parliament passed the Amending Act of 1781, also known as the Act of Settlement. This act made 5 key rectifications. It exempted the Governor-General, his council, and company servants from the Supreme Court's jurisdiction for their official acts. It also completely excluded revenue matters and the collection of revenue from the Supreme Court's purview. Now, it did explicitly give the Supreme Court jurisdiction over all inhabitants of Calcutta, but with a major caveat. It required the court to administer the personal law of the defendants, meaning Hindu law for Hindus and Mohammedan law for Muslims. Additionally, it directed that appeals from provincial courts go to the Governor-General and Council rather than the Supreme Court. And finally, it empowered that same Governor-General and Council to frame regulations for those provincial courts.
Now this brings us to Pitt's India Act of 1784, introduced by Prime Minister William Pitt. And this brilliantly illustrates the separation of powers. The Act clearly distinguished between commercial and political functions. It allowed the existing Court of Directors to keep managing commercial affairs, but it created a brand new body called the Board of Control to manage political affairs. So we get a double government system. This Board of Control was empowered to supervise all operations of civil and military government revenues. The crucial takeaway here is that this act was doubly significant. First, it gave the British government supreme control over company affairs, and second, it was the very first time the company's territories were officially referred to as the British possessions in India.
Just 2 years later, things get highly specific with the Act of 1786. When Lord Cornwallis was appointed Governor-General of Bengal, he flat out refused the post unless 2 exact demands were met. He wanted the power to override the decisions of his council in special cases, and he demanded to also hold the role of commander-in-chief. The Act of 1786 was enacted literally just to grant both of those provisions to get him on board.
The Charter Act of 1793 basically took what Cornwallis demanded and ran with it. It took that overriding power given to Cornwallis and extended it to all future governor-generals and governors of presidencies. It also tightened control even further over the subordinate presidencies of Bombay and Madras, and it extended the company's trade monopoly in India for another 20 years. Furthermore, it stipulated that the commander-in-chief was not automatically a member of the Governor-General's Council unless they were specifically appointed. And finally, it laid down that the members of the Board of Control and all their staff were from now on to be paid straight out of Indian revenues. Things shift drastically with the Charter Act of 1813. It finally abolished the company's general trade monopoly in India, completely opening the doors to all British merchants, although they did keep the monopoly on tea and trade with China. It formally asserted the sovereignty of the British Crown over the company's Indian territories. It also officially allowed Christian missionaries to enter India for the purpose of enlightening the people. It provided for the spread of Western education among the inhabitants, and uniquely, it authorized local governments in India to impose taxes on persons, and get this, they could even punish them for not paying. Moving on to the Charter Act of 1833, this is the final step towards centralization. It made the Governor-General of Bengal the Governor-General of India, vesting him with all civil and military powers. Lord William Bentinck became the very first to hold this monumental title. This act entirely deprived the governors of Bombay and Madras of their legislative powers. In fact, from now on, laws made were called acts, whereas under previous acts they were merely regulations. It also ended the East India Company as a commercial body entirely, making it purely administrative, stating that it held territories simply in trust for His Majesty. Interestingly, it also attempted to introduce open competition for civil servants regardless of being Indian, but this provision was actually negated after massive pushback from the Court of Directors. The final Charter Act in 1853, it's an absolute constitutional landmark. For one, it separated the legislative and executive functions of the Governor-General's Council, creating a 6-member Indian Central Legislative Council that functioned brilliantly, kind of like a mini parliament. It also finally achieved that open competition system for civil servants. Our source notes this opened the higher covenanted civil service to Indians, which led to the appointment of the Macaulay Committee in 1854, as opposed to the lower uncovenanted service. Now, unlike previous acts, it extended company rule indefinitely, without a specific time frame, indicating Parliament could terminate it at will. Lastly, it introduced local representation for the first time. 4 of the 6 new legislative members were appointed by the local governments of Madras, Bombay, Bengal, and Agra.
Section 2, the Crown assumes control, covering 1858 to 1909. Following the massive 1857 Sepoy Mutiny, the British Crown steps in directly. The Government of India Act of 1858, literally known as the Act for the Good Government of India, completely abolished the East India Company. India was now to be governed directly in the name of Her Majesty. The Governor-General was redesignated as the Viceroy of India, with Lord Canning being the very first. It smashed that double government system by abolishing both the Board of Control and the Court of Directors. In their place, it created the new office of the Secretary of State for India, a British cabinet member with complete authority over Indian administration. This secretary was advised by a newly established 15-member Council of India, and together, the Secretary of State in Council was constituted as a corporate body capable of suing and being sued. Seeking a bit more cooperation after the 1857 revolt, we get the Indian Councils Act of 1861, which made a tiny beginning in representative institutions. Viceroy Lord Canning nominated 3 Indians, the Raja of Benares, the Maharaja of Patiala, and Sir Dinkar Rao, to his legislative council. It also initiated a trend of decentralization by returning legislative powers to Bombay and Madras, and established new legislative councils for Bengal, the northwestern provinces, and Punjab. Administratively, it gave statutory recognition to Lord Canning's 1859 portfolio system, where council members were in charge of specific government departments, and granted the Viceroy the power to issue emergency ordinances lasting 6 months without council concurrence. Next up is the Indian Councils Act of 1892, which expanded things slightly. It increased the number of non-official members in both central and provincial legislative councils, though official members definitely still held the majority. It increased council functions, notably giving them the power to discuss the budget, which our source points out was first introduced in 1860, and to address questions to the executive. It also provided for the nomination of non-official members via recommendation from various local bodies. But it's vital to note here, the literal word election was intentionally avoided in the Act. It was carefully and deliberately framed as a nomination process. Okay, the 1909 Act, famously known as the Morley-Minto Reforms. This one is huge. It drastically increased the central legislative council size from 16 to 60. While the Central Council retained an official majority, it allowed provincial councils to finally have non-official majorities. It expanded deliberative functions, letting members ask supplementary questions and move budget resolutions. It associated Indians with the executive councils for the very first time, with Satyendra Prasad Sinha becoming the first Indian to join the Viceroy's executive council as the law member. But crucially, it introduced communal representation for Muslims through separate electorates. This effectively legalized communalism, earning Lord Minto the rather heavy title of the father of communal electorate. Finally, it provided separate representation for presidency corporations, chambers of commerce, universities, and zamindars.
Section 3. Towards responsible government from 1919 to 1947.
The Government of India Act of 1919, or the Montagu-Chelmsford Reforms, is massively detailed, so let's break it down. Administratively, it separated central and provincial subjects via devolution rules and introduced diarchy in the provinces. This meant splitting subjects into transferred subjects run by ministers and reserved subjects handled solely by the governor. Legislatively, it introduced bicameralism and direct elections at the center, while requiring that 3 of the 6 Viceroy Executive Council members be Indian. Socially, it extended communal separate electorates to Sikhs, Indian Christians, Anglo-Indians, and Europeans, and granted a limited franchise based on property, tax, or education. It also set up huge administrative bodies, a new High Commissioner in London, it separated provincial budgets from the central budget, and established a Public Service Commission, which led to a central PSC in 1926 based on the Lee Commission of 1923-24. Finally, it mandated a statutory commission after 10 years to review the Act and proposed the Chamber of Princes, which was inaugurated in 1921.
Between the major acts, the timeline gets incredibly intense. In 1927, the British appointed the 7-member Simon Commission to report on India's condition. Because it was entirely British, all Indian parties fiercely boycotted it. Following its report, British Prime Minister Ramsay MacDonald announced the Communal Award in 1932. This controversially extended separate electorates to the depressed classes. In response, Mahatma Gandhi undertook a fast unto death in Yaravawa jail in Pune. This extreme, high-stakes pressure resulted in the Pune Pact, a historic agreement with Dr. B.R. Ambedkar that retained Hindu joint electorates but provided reserved seats for the depressed classes instead.
All of this pressure culminated in the Government of India Act of 1935, an unbelievably detailed framework with 15 sweeping features. First, it proposed an all-India federation, dividing powers into federal, provincial, and concurrent lists. It abolished provincial diarchy, replacing it with provincial autonomy, while attempting to adopt diarchy at the center. It introduced bicameralism in 6 out of 11 provinces, extended separate electorates to depressed classes, women, and labor, and expanded franchise to about 14% of the population. It also abolished the Council of India from 1858, separated Burma from India, created the new provinces of Orissa and Sindh, and provided minority safeguards. And structurally, it established an absolutely massive array of institutions: the Reserve Bank of India, federal, provincial, and joint public service commissions, a federal court, a federal railway authority, and an Auditor General of India.
Following Prime Minister Attlee's declaration and the Mountbatten Plan, we reached the monumental Indian Independence Act of 1947. This officially ended British rule on August 15, 1947, and partitioned India into 2 independent dominions, with borders drawn by the Ratcliffe Boundary Commission. Structurally, it abolished both the Viceroy and a Secretary of State for India, providing a Governor-General for each dominion, and empowering the constituent assemblies to frame their own constitutions and legislate in the meantime. It proclaimed the lapse of British paramountcy over princely states, giving them the freedom to join either dominion or remain independent, and allowed interim governance via the 1935 Act. Symbolically, it deprived the British monarch of the right to veto bills, designated the governor-generals and provincial governors as purely constitutional, nominal heads, dropped the Emperor of India title entirely, and discontinued all civil service appointments by the Secretary of State.
Section 4. The First Cabinets. Let's read through exactly who made up the 14-member interim government of 1946. It is vital to remember that the Viceroy was technically still the head of this council at the time. Jawaharlal Nehru served as Vice President and held external affairs and Commonwealth relations. Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel held home, information, and broadcasting. Dr. Rajendra Prasad was in charge of food and agriculture. Dr. John Mathai managed industries and supplies. Jajivan Ram was Minister of Labor. Sardar Baldev Singh held defense. C.H. Baba was responsible for works, mines, and power. Liaquat Ali Khan managed finance. Abdur Rab Nishtar held posts and air. Asif Ali managed railways and transport. C. Rajagopalachari oversaw education and arts. I. Chandigarh was in charge of commerce. Hasnafar Ali Khan held health. And finally, Jogendranath Mandal served as the law member. And finally, the full 14-member First Cabinet of Independent India in 1947. Let's pay close attention to who shifted roles. Jawaharlal Nehru is now Prime Minister, holding external affairs, Commonwealth relations, and scientific research. Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel held home, information and broadcasting, and states. Dr. Rajendra Prasad retained food and agriculture. Maulana Abul Kalam Azad took education. Dr. John Mathai shifted to railways and transport. R.K. Shanmugam Chetty managed finance. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar became the law minister.
Jagjivan Ram remained in labor. Sardar Baldev Singh stayed in defense. Raj Kumari Amrit Kaur took health. C.H. Baba shifted to commerce. Rafi Ahmed Kidwai managed communication. Dr. Shama Prasad Mukherjee took industries and suppliers. And V.N. Gadil handled works, mines, and power. So, having walked through every single legal mechanism and act that built up to this very cabinet, I want to leave you with a question. How does understanding this deeply structured, centuries-long colonial scaffolding change your view of the modern democratic institutions we rely on today? Thanks for joining me in this explainer.